back to the video classes. This is once again with you, MS Praveen Kumar, Assistant Professor of Political Science, Government Degree College, Hayathnagar. As a part of e-content development, the topic that today we are going to discuss is the President's Rule. Or else we also can call it as Article number 356. And it is also called as the State Emergency. Well, coming to the President's Rule, this is one of the very important topic of the Indian Constitution. And not only that, this is the most controversial article in the Indian Constitution. So that is when there were the discussions going on in the Constituent Assembly regarding Article number 356. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, he confidently opined that this remains as the dead letter in the Indian Constitution. That is, he thought that this article will be used very sparingly in the Indian political system. But to the surprise of everyone, the experiences of Indian democracy has shown that the President's Rule, that is according to Article number 356, this has been imposed not less than 119 times in India. And we have seen many a times the state governments have been suspended. The state governments which have been elected by the people, they have been suspended by imposing Article number 356. And majority of the times we observe that this Article number 356 has been imposed on a very unfair grounds in India. So in this session, we are going to discuss about what are the emergency powers of the President of India, and particularly we will discuss about the President's Rule and on what grounds the President's Rule is imposed in India, and what are the effects of President's Rule. Then later, what are the judgments of Supreme Court regarding the imposition of President's Rule in India, and finally we will discuss about the differences between the national emergency and the President's Rule. Well, coming to the basics of this topic, we know the Indian Constitution, it gives two kinds of powers to the President. The first set of powers, they are called as the ordinary powers, and the second type of powers are called as the emergency powers. So coming to the ordinary powers, they are explained in Part 5 of the Indian Constitution from Article number 52 to Article number 62. And coming to the emergency powers, they are explained in Part 18 of the Indian Constitution from Article number 352 to Article number 360. So these ordinary powers of the President, they have been inspired from the British parliamentary system. And coming to the emergency powers, these have been inspired from the Weimar Constitution of Germany. So in India, when everything is normal, when normal circumstances prevail in India, then the powers which are exercised by the President, we call them as the ordinary powers. But when an emergency situation arises, what is an emergency situation? Is when an unexpected situation or when an unforeseen situation like a war or the armed rebellion among the people or a civil war arises in India. To tackle such kind of situation or to grapple with such kind of situations, the powers which are bestowed to the President of India by the Constitution, we call them as the emergency powers. So here, the Constitution of India, it gives three kinds of emergency powers to the President. The first one is called as the national emergency. This is explained in Article number 352. The second one is called as the President's Rule, but normally it is also called as the state emergency, and this is explained in Article number 356. And the third one is the financial emergency, which is explained in Article number 360. So here in today's session, in particular, we'll discuss about the second emergency power of the President, and that is the President's Rule, which is explained in Article number 356. Now here, before we jump into the topic of our discussion today, that is the President's rule, we'll discuss about one very important topic of the Indian Constitution, and that is Article number 355. So this Article 355, it's like a backdrop for imposing the President's rule in India. And what this article says is, it shall be the duty of the Union to protect every state against external aggression and internal disturbances, and to ensure that the government of every state is carried on in accordance to the provisions of this Constitution. So this Article 355, it is clearly bestowing the responsibility upon the Union government to protect the state governments from three different aspects. Number one is the external aggression or the war, and second one is the internal disturbances, and the third and the very important aspect is the respecting the Constitution of India. So according to this article, the primary responsibility of the Union government in the Indian federal system is to see that the state government shall be maintained according to the provisions of the Constitution. So it is the Union government which has to ensure that all the state governments in India, they run according to the provisions of the Constitution of India. So in this manner, this article number 355, it remains as a backdrop in imposing the President's rule in India. And now here we come to the very important article of discussion for today, that is article number 356, according to which the President's rule is imposed in India. So this article 356 is based on section 93 of the Government of India Act 1935. So we know that the chief source of the Indian Constitution is the Government of India Act 1935. That is, the many provisions in Indian Constitution, they have been influenced from the Government of India Act 1935. So even this article number 356 also is based on section 93 of the Government of India Act 1935. Now coming to what this article says, what article 356 what it says is, if the President is satisfied. So once again I'll repeat this word. If the President is satisfied that there exists a situation where the state administration cannot be carried on in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution, he can make a proclamation of failure of constitutional machinery in a state. So what is necessary in imposing the President's rule in a state is the President has to be satisfied. So the President has to be satisfied that the state administration cannot be carried on according to the provisions of the Constitution, or there is a constitutional breakdown within a state, then the President can proclaim the President's rule in a state. And if we take one more article, that is article number 365, what it says is, President's rule can be imposed if any state fails to comply with all directions given by the Union on matters it is empowered to. That is, when we were discussing about the administrative relations between the Union and states, so there we have seen that whatever the executive orders which are given by the Union government to the state governments, the state governments have to comply with the orders which are given by the Union government. Otherwise, or else failing which, the Union government can impose article number 356 in a state. So this topic we'll discuss a little bit in detail. Now here, to have a very brief recap on the administrative relations between Union and states, we know this topic is explained in part 11 of the Indian Constitution from article number 256 to article number 263. So in this we'll touch upon two important articles. So first of all, if we take article number 256, what it says is, the executive power of every state shall be so exercised as to ensure compliance with the laws made by the parliament. So the executive authority of the states, it has to be maintained in such a way that it has to be in compliance, or else it has to be in accordance with the laws made by the parliament. And next, coming to the next article, article number 257(1), what it says is, the executive power of the state should not impede or prejudice the executive power of the union. That is, the executive power of the states should not be exercised in such a way that it stands as an obstacle in the executive power of the union. And regarding the executive power, the union government can give the directions to the state governments. So whatever the directions which are given by the union governments, they have to be obeyed by the state governments. Failing which, the union government can impose article number 356 or the president's rule in that particular state. So this is about the brief recap about the administrative relations between the union and the states. Now here we will see on what grounds the president's rule is imposed. That is, from where the president, or else from whom the president has to get an information that there is a constitutional breakdown in the state, or else how the president will come to know that the state administration in any particular state is not carried on according to the constitution. So regarding this, what article number 356 it says is, if the president receives a report from the state governor or otherwise is convinced or satisfied that the state situation is such that the state government cannot be carried on according to the provisions of the constitution, then the president can declare the president's rule in a state. So what is the primary requisite of imposing a president's rule in a state is, the first thing is there has to be a constitutional breakdown within a state. And the second thing is, the president has to receive, regarding this, the president has to receive a report from the governor of that particular state. Or here the constitution also it is mentioning that to impose the president's rule, the report of the governor is necessary, or there is another word that is used is, or otherwise is convinced or satisfied. That is, if the president himself is convinced or the president is satisfied that the administration of a state cannot be carried on in accordance with the provisions of the constitution, then the president can declare the president's rule in a state. So here we understood that the president's rule can be imposed when there is a constitutional breakdown within a state, or else the administration cannot be carried on in accordance with the provisions of the constitution. Now, what is the meaning of the constitutional breakdown, or else what are the instances which we can cite to say that when this particular situation arises, then we can call it as the constitutional breakdown. So here for our understanding, we'll take a few of the examples. The first situation is when the state legislature is not able to elect a leader as the chief minister for a time prescribed by the state governor. That is, in any state, the elections are conducted to the legislative assembly and no political party gets the majority. So normally if any political party gets the majority, the leader of that political party will be automatically invited by the governor and he will be appointed as the chief minister. But a situation arises where no political party gets the majority. So during that time, in the stipulated period which is given by the governor, if the state legislature, that is the members of the state legislatures, they are not able to elect a leader as the chief minister, then the governor, he can recommend to the president to impose the president's rule in the state. And the second instance is when there is a breakdown of coalition in the state government. That is, when no political party gets the majority and few political parties come together, they form a coalition and they come to power. And after a few days, there is a break in this coalition. That is, if any of the political party has come out of this particular coalition, and there is no other combination of political parties to form the alternative government, then also the governor will recommend to the president to impose the president's rule. And the third one is when a no confidence motion is passed in the legislative assembly against the chief minister and the council of ministers. So when a no confidence motion is passed and the no confidence motion is approved by the state legislative assembly and the government is suspended, then also this also will be considered as the breakdown of constitutional machinery in the state and the president's rule can be imposed. And the fourth reason that we can cite over here is the postponement of elections in a state owing to unavoidable reasons such as natural disasters or epidemic or war or something like that, or even we could include the reason like terrorism. So if in any state the elections cannot be conducted because of some unavoidable reasons. So for this we can take the example of Jammu and Kashmir and also in Punjab, where for many years there was the prevalence of this problem of terrorism. So during that time, it was not possible to conduct the elections in those states and elect a new government. So for that reason, in both these states, for many number of years, the president's rule was imposed in those states. So when we are talking about the breakdown of the constitutional machinery, so what is the meaning of the breakdown of constitutional machinery? Or else when we can say that the provisions of the constitution, that is the state administration cannot be run according to the provisions of the constitution. So for that we can take these instances to show that in these instances the constitutional machinery, that is within a state there is the breakdown of the constitutional machinery and the state governments or else the administration of the states cannot be maintained according to the provisions of the constitution. Now coming to the approval of the president's rule. Just like the national emergency, that is if national emergency has to be imposed, the proclamation of national emergency has to be approved by both the houses of parliament within 1 month. So same here, even for imposing the president's rule also, this proclamation has to be approved by the parliament. And the procedure is the proclamation of president's rule should be approved by both the houses of parliament within 2 months of its issue. So this approval is through a simple majority. That is, from the date of issue of the proclamation, this proclamation has to be approved by both the houses of parliament within 2 months. That is, the day on which the proclamation is issued, the same day the bill also, that is this proclamation also will be introduced in the parliament. So if it is approved by the parliament, then the proclamation of the president's rule will continue for 6 months. And if it is not approved in the parliament, the proclamation shall be revoked after 2 months. That is, it will continue after till 2 months, and after 2 months the proclamation ceases to exist. But it is approved by the parliament. If it is approved by the parliament, the proclamation will continue for 6 months. So in this manner, again, if this president's rule has to be extended, again for the 6 months, for the next 6 months, this has to be approved by the parliament. So with the approval of the parliament every 6 months, the proclamation can be continued up to a maximum of 3 years and not more than 3 years. but it is only regarding two states, that is Jammu and Kashmir and Punjab. The proclamation of President's rule has been extended for more than 3 years. But regarding this, there was an amendment made into the Indian Constitution. But normally, the maximum tenure of the President's rule is it should not extend more than 3 years. But later, when Janata government has come to power in the year 1977, so they came out with an amendment, that is the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act in the year 1978. So according to this amendment, what is the change that was brought about in the Indian Constitution is, if the President's rule has to be extended more than a year, then two requirements or else two conditions have to be fulfilled. And the first condition is, there has to be a national emergency in India. That is, if during that time the national emergency is in prevalence in India, then what happens is the President's rule also can be extended more than 1 year. And the second requirement that has to be fulfilled is, the Election Commission of India has to certify that it is necessary to continue the President's rule in the state because of the difficulties in conducting assembly elections in the state. So, if the President's rule has to be extended for more than 1 year, the first condition that has to be fulfilled is, during that time the national emergency should be in prevalence in India. And the second thing is, the Election Commission has to certify that in that particular state elections cannot be conducted because of some unavoidable situations. So only then the President's rule can be continued more than 1 year. So this is according to the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act passed in 1978. Now to discuss about the effects of President's rule. That is, if President's rule is imposed in a state, then what are the changes that we find in the system of administration in that particular state? The first thing that happens is, the state government will be suspended, and the state legislature either will be suspended or it will be dissolved by the President. So this is the difference between the national emergency and the President's rule. When national emergency is imposed, it is always not necessary to suspend the state governments or to suspend the state legislative assemblies. But when the President's rule is imposed, then what happens is, the state government will be suspended and the state legislative assemblies also will be dissolved or suspended. So when the state government is suspended and the legislative assemblies are dissolved, then who will carry on the administration of the state is, now the administration of the state will come into the hands of the President. So that's the reason why it is called as the President's rule. So the President will carry on the administration of the state with the help of the state governor. And one more important effect of the President's rule is, so when the President's rule is imposed in a state and when the state legislative assemblies are suspended, so for that particular state, now whatever the laws have to be passed, those laws will be passed by the Union Parliament. That is, now the Parliament will get the power to pass the laws even over the items of the state list. That is, the 61 items which are enumerated in the state list, the Parliament will get the power to pass the laws over the items of the state list for that particular state. And when the President's rule is in prevalence in a state, what happens is, when the Parliament is not in session, that is during that time, if the Parliament is not in session to pass the laws for that particular state, then the President can issue the ordinance. The President can promulgate the ordinance for that particular state. And one more very important effect of the President's rule when compared to national emergencies, when national emergency is imposed, then what is happening is, Article number 19, that is the fundamental rights which are specified in Article number 19, they will be automatically suspended. But when president's rule is imposed, what happens is there will be no change regarding the fundamental rights. No fundamental rights will be suspended, and the fundamental rights will continue as they are provided in the Indian Constitution. So these are the effects of the president's rule in India. Now coming to the revocation of the president's rule, that is, if the president's rule has to be suspended or it has to be removed. So for this, there is no need of any approval by the parliament. So it is the president, anytime he can call for the revocation of the president's rule in a state. So for imposing the president's rule, then the approval of the parliament is necessary. But for the revocation, so there is no need of approval of the parliament. Anytime the president by order can revoke the president's rule in any of the states. Now to discuss about the brief history of the president's rule in India. For the first time, the president's rule was imposed in the year 1951 in Punjab. And coming to the highest number of times the president's rule was imposed in which state was, it was imposed in the state of Uttar Pradesh for nearly 10 times. And this is followed by Bihar. In Bihar, it was imposed for 9 times. So the president's rule for the first time was imposed in Punjab in 1951, and it was imposed highest number of times in Uttar Pradesh. And coming to the record of most number of days under the president's rule, which state was under the president's rule for most number of days is, it was Punjab. So Punjab, for nearly 3,500 days, it was under the president's rule, and once for continuous for 5 years, that is from 1987 to 1992, Punjab was under president's rule. And coming to the continuous stretch of president's rule in any state, the highest continuous stretch of the president's rule in any state without a break in between it was in Jammu and Kashmir. So that is from 1990 to 1996, continuously Jammu and Kashmir was under president's rule. So this is about the brief history of the imposition of president's rule in India. Now, if we have to evaluate about the president's rule in India, that is the article imposition of article number 356. So basically, this article is provided in the Indian Constitution to protect the integrity and unity of the country. And as we discussed earlier, it was Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in the Constituent Assembly who confidently who thought that this will be, that is Article 356 will be a dead letter, and it will be very sparingly used in the Indian political system. But our experience has shown that this article number 356, it has been extensively imposed in India in different states. And here we cannot exempt any of the political parties. So if we have to take the statistics of imposition of president's rule in India, it was 84% of the time the president's rule was imposed by the Congress party. And if we take the example of one decade from 1966 to 1977, when Srimati Indira Gandhi, she was the Prime Minister of India, nearly 39 times the president's rule was imposed in various states. And later, when Janata government has come to power, and they have made an amendment, that is 44th amendment in the year 1978, to revert the excesses made by the Congress party. So though the Janata government has come post emergency period, but still we find Janata government also, it has recommended for the imposition of president's rule for nearly 6 times, and nearly in 9 occasions, that is in 9 states, the Janata government also has imposed the president's rule. So that is here we can observe that the history of Indian political system, where we find is this Article 356, it has been misused by all the political parties that have come to power. So this has been used to see that whichever state where the opposition political parties have come to power, so under any excuse, because of any small excuse also, this Article 356 has been imposed, and it is seen that those opposition, the governments of opposition political parties will be destabilized. And we also can take the example of the Babri Masjid issue of 1992. When Babri Masjid was demolished in Uttar Pradesh, then the government of India, it has imposed president's rule and suspended the government not only in Uttar Pradesh but in all the 5 states where the opposition political party was in power. So by this what we can understand is in India all the political parties, so in one way or another way, they have misused this article number 356 in imposing the president's rule in different states, and in seeing that the state governments which are elected by the people, they are destabilized within a state. So this is about the brief evaluation of the president's rule in India. Now here we'll discuss about one very important case of the Supreme Court regarding the president's rule, and that is the S.R. Bommai case of 11th March 1994. So in this case, what the Supreme Court has declared is, the Supreme Court put forth certain strict guidelines for the imposition of Article number 356. So according to this particular declaration, that is in this particular case, what the Supreme Court said is, the proclamation of the president's rule is subject to the judicial review. This is one very important point in S.R. Bommai's case. So what it says is, the proclamation of the president's rule is subject to the judicial review. And here we know what is the meaning of the judicial review. So judicial review is one very important power of the judiciary to declare the laws which are passed by the legislature or the orders of the executive as ultra vires or unconstitutional if they are against the provisions of the Constitution. So that is, whenever the laws which are made by the legislature or else the orders which are issued by the executive, they are against the provisions of the Constitution, then the judiciary has the power to declare such kind of laws as ultra vires or unconstitutional. So this is called as the power of judicial review. So in this case, what the Supreme Court has done is, so now the Supreme Court has brought this proclamation of president's rule under the judicial review. And not only that, in this case, the Supreme Court continued to say that the court has the power to revive the suspended or dissolved state government if the grounds for the imposition of president's rule is found to be invalid or unconstitutional. So, if at all the grounds on which the president's rule is imposed, it is found to be invalid or it is found to be unconstitutional, then the Supreme Court has the power to revive the governments, or else the Supreme Court has the power to bring back the governments into power. So here we have to discuss about again Article number 74. So this Article number 74, what it says is, there shall be a Union Council of Ministers with Prime Minister as its head to aid and advise the President. And later, according to the 42nd Amendment Act in the year 1976, what it was done is, the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister, it is binding upon the President to follow this advice. And the advice which is given by the Council of Ministers shall not be questioned in any court of law. But now in this particular case, that is S.R. Bommai's case. So what it is saying is, this advice which is given by the Union Council of Ministers to the President to impose the President's rule, the Supreme Court is not questioning the authority of the Council of Ministers to give the advice to the President, but the Supreme Court has the authority to question the grounds on which this advice has been given to impose the President's rule in a state. So one more very important aspect of S.R. Bommai's case is here, the State Assembly cannot be dissolved before the parliamentary approval for the imposition of Article number 356, and the President can only suspend the Assembly. So that is, here we know to impose the President's rule in a state, what is necessary is that proclamation has to be approved by both the Houses of Parliament within 2 months from the date of issue of the proclamation. So during this time, that is before this proclamation is approved by the Parliament, the President has no power to dissolve the Legislative Assembly. So what he can do is, he can only suspend the Assembly, but he has no power to dissolve the Assembly till the time the proclamation is approved by both the Houses of Parliament. And one more provision of this particular judgment is, serious allegations of corruption against the State Ministry and financial instability are not the grounds for the imposition of Article number 356. So the allegations of corruption on a state government, or else the financial instability in a state. So this cannot be considered as the grounds for imposing the President's rule. Like now we can take the example of most of the states in India. So because of this COVID-19 situation, the financial situation of all the states has been destabilized. So if in any of the state, if there is a very serious financial unstable situation also, this cannot be considered as a ground to impose the President's rule in that particular state. And one more important statement of S.R. Bommai's case is, any action by the state government that leads to the security of secularism, which is the basic feature of the Indian Constitution. That is, we know secularism is considered as one of the basic feature of the Indian Constitution because the preamble, it mentions that India is a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic and a republic state. So any action of the state government that leads to the security of secularism, this cannot be considered as the grounds for imposing Article number 356. And the next is, if the Ministry of the State resigns or is dismissed or loses the majority, then the Governor cannot advise the President to impose Article number 356 unless enough steps are taken up by the Governor for the formation of an alternative government. So when the state government is suspended or the state government is dissolved, so the Governor should not immediately recommend to the President to impose the President's rule. Rather, the governor has to take measures or else to take steps to see that an alternative government is formed in the state. So when all the measures are exhausted, when all the steps are exhausted, as a last resort, the Governor has to recommend to the President to impose the President's rule. So from this judgment of Supreme Court, that is in S.R. Bommai's case, so what the Supreme Court is saying is, Article 356 has to be imposed only in cases of exigencies or only in exceptional cases, and it has to be imposed very sparingly, or else it has to be imposed only as a last resort. So this case, S.R. Bommai's case, is considered as the landmark judgment regarding the imposition of president's rule in India. And now, because we have finished about the president's rule, here we have seen about what are the grounds on which the president's rule is imposed in India, and what are the effects of the president's rule, and also we discussed about SR Bommai's case of Supreme Court regarding the president's rule in India. So to get a better understanding of the president's rule, we'll have a comparison between the president's rule and the national emergency. So we'll find what are the differences between the national emergency and the state emergency or the president's rule. So coming to the first difference between national emergency and the president's rule is, the national emergency is imposed according to article number 352, and the president's rule is imposed according to article number 356. And the other differences between the national emergency and the president's rule is, the national emergency is imposed on three grounds. One is because of war, second one is external aggressions, or the third one is the armed rebellion. And coming to the president's rule is imposed when the administration of the state government cannot be maintained according to the provisions of the constitution, or else when there is a constitutional breakdown within the state. The third one is when national emergency is imposed, it is always not necessary that the state governments have to be suspended. So normally the state governments will not be suspended, or the state legislative also will not be suspended. But when national emergency is imposed, what happens is all the powers will come into the hands of the central government. So whatever the directions given by the central governments, they have to be followed by the states. And not only over the items of the union list, over every subject matter, the central government will be getting the overriding powers. So whatever the advice given by the central government, they have to be followed by the states. So here the state governments will not be suspended. But coming to the president's rule, when the president's rule is imposed, what happens is the state government will be suspended. The executive will be suspended and the legislature also will be suspended. So when the state government is suspended, then the administration of the state, it comes directly under the control of the president, and the president will carry on the administration of the state with the help of the state governor. And coming to the items of the union, the items of the state list. So when national emergency is imposed, then what happens is, over the items of the state list, automatically it is the parliament which will get the power to formulate the laws. But when the president's rule is imposed, what happens is, here the parliament will be delegated the powers to formulate the laws over the items enumerated in the state list to that particular state, the state wherein the president's rule has been imposed. And coming to the next difference, the national emergency can be in operation for indefinite period of time. That is, the constitution does not prescribe any maximum period for its operation. So it has to be approved by the parliament every 6 months. So in that manner, if it is approved by the parliament every 6 months, then the national emergency will continue for indefinite period of time. But coming to the state emergency or the president's rule, the maximum period of the continuation of the president's rule is only 3 years. So provided it has to be approved by both the houses of parliament every 6 months. So that way the president's rule to the maximum period of 6 months it can be continued. And now coming to one more relationship, when national emergency is imposed, there will be no, when national emergency is imposed, what happens is there will be an impact on the relationship between the state government and the central government. That is, there will be an impact upon the federal structure of India. So when national emergency is imposed, what happens is India, which was a federal state under normal circumstances, it completely transforms into a unitary state. So during this time, the relationship between the center and the state government, it will undergo a drastic change. So India, from a federal state, it will transform into a unitary state. But when the president's rule is imposed, then it does not bring any change in the relationship between the central government and the state government. So the federal structure, it remains the same. There will not be any change in the federal structure of India. And one more change is, when national emergency is imposed, what is happening is the fundamental rights of the people will be suspended. But of course, Article number 20 and 21, they are exempted from suspension, and 44th Constitutional Amendment Act in the year 1978, what it said is, when emergency is imposed only on the grounds of war or external aggression, only then Article number 19 has to be suspended. So here, anyway, when the national emergency is imposed, there will be some effect upon the fundamental rights of the people. But when president's rule is imposed, there will not be any alterations, or there will not be any change regarding the fundamental rights. The fundamental rights will not be suspended. And finally, coming to the revocation. So if national emergency has to be revoked, it has to be approved by Lok Sabha. Then the national emergency will be revoked. So it has to be approved by the parliament. And coming to the president's rule can be revoked any time by the president. So for this, the approval of the parliament is not necessary. So these are few of the differences between the national emergency and the president's rule. So here we come to the end of this topic, that is the president's rule, or article number 356. So basically we know article 356, it is incorporated in the Indian constitution to see that the unity and integrity of the nation will be protected. But the experiences of or the lessons of the Indian political system, what it shows is, this article has been, most of the time, this has been misused in India. So completely against the opinion of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, when he opined that this will be a dead letter in the Indian constitution, but still our experiences have shown that this has been widely and extensively used for the personal interests of the political parties in power. So this is about article number 356, or the president's rule. So in next class, we will be discussing about the next emergency power of the president, and that is the financial emergency. So till then, have a nice time.